Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I am Naeem Muhammad Khan, part of the Toronto Dawa team. We are here at P4E, and Sister Tabasum, Dr. Tabasum Hussain, will be giving a lecture on the young marriage of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. Let me give you a brief introduction on who Dr. Tabasum is. She has a Bachelor's of Science Honours, Biological Sciences, University of Westminster, England. Master of Sciences, Advanced Neuroscience, University College, London, England. PhD in Psychological Medicine, Monash University, Australia. She has engaged in one-on-one dawah for over 30 years and has now left her profession and now focuses on dawah and interfaith dialogue. She is part of the Toronto Dawah team and part of the Muslim Debate Initiative. Dr. Tabasum Hussain.
All right. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I begin in the name of God, the most merciful, the most gracious. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for attending this evening's event. On behalf of the Muslim Debate Initiative team, I would like to extend a special thanks to Brother Muhammad Robert Heft for inviting us to hold this event here at the Paradise Forever Centre in Scarborough in Canada. And I would like to also thank the volunteers without whom we cannot hold such events. A special thanks to Brother Naeem Muhammad and Brother Imad Ali, who have also helped in putting this event together. So I'll just start. And Islam, being the hot topic it is today, means that Muslims are having to cope with and deal with many questions that are being thrown at us. Many questions and comments about Islam, more so compared to, say, 20 years ago, 50, 100 years ago. At times, these questions and comments will be very sincere, and it will be a sincere attempt to try and understand what Islam is really about and what it means to us as Muslims. Occasionally, the comments and the questions will be negative and pointed. So the topic for this evening's presentation is centered around one of these questions, and which may also come as a comment, which is it true that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, married a 9-year-old girl? Now, the question stems from authentic hadiths or reports that young Aisha radiallahu anha, she married when she was 6 or 7 years old, and that the marriage was consummated when she was 9 years of age. So whether the question is sincere or pointed, how do we as Muslims respond? How do Muslims respond? One Muslim is quoted as saying, "My Prophet was a gentleman, and he did not marry an innocent 7 or 6-year-old or a 9-year-old girl." Now, this type of response is expected because it's in line with what is socially acceptable in the times we live in today. Understandably, the times, the culture, the practices we're exposed to influence and shape the way we think and what we identify or recognize as acceptable or normal today. And missionaries and critics know this. Missionaries and critics know this and use this to their advantage to confirm or support the position that this marriage was socially and morally unacceptable and wrong. Now, Muslims also respond by saying there are reports suggesting that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, married Aisha radiallahu anha when she was 6 and consummated the marriage at 9. However, there are other evidences to support the fact that she may have been older. Now, while for many Muslims this would have been once enough of a response, there's now an expectation or demand that you clarify which of the two positions you take. Do you believe that Aisha, when she married the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was 9 years old or 6 years old, or was she older? Was she in her teens or her late teens, as some Muslims, suggest. Now, while evidence put forward to support the position that Aisha may have been older when she married may deserve attention, there is no documented report stating that she was older. But there are reports, authentic hadiths, that do clearly state that she was 6 or 7 years old when she married and 9 years old when she consummated the marriage. My response and my position this evening at this presentation tonight is simply to say it how it is, how it was reported. And that is, yes, according to hadiths, Aisha radiallahu anha did marry at age 6 or 7. She did consummate the marriage at age 9. And she did remain in this marriage until she was widowed for 9 years. Now, what's implied in the question and what's expected in the answer or response is that this should be condemned, it should be considered wrong, and we should find this disturbing. Am I disturbed by this? Should Muslims overall be disturbed by this? Before we condemn something or state that something is wrong, we should ask why. Why should we condemn it? Why should we be disturbed by it? What's the measuring stick? What is the criteria that leads us to this conclusion? So this evening we ask, who says it was wrong? Why was it wrong? Was it wrong? So let's begin by asking who says it was wrong. There are those who generally object to any 9-year-old being married. Anyone under the legal age of consent simply being married, simply because it goes against the norms and the expectations of the world we live in today. Then there are those who have a vested interest in attacking Islam and who go that extra mile to discredit and demonize the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. I mean, Islamophobia is a lucrative business. It's worth millions. It's worth billions. And we can take a guess why. So while some critics do not disclose their religious leaning or affiliation, much of the condemnation and criticism is spearheaded by Christian apologists and polemicists who have a vested interest of their own. So when I mention Christians tonight, please understand that this will be in direct reference to those who openly condemn and criticize the marriage of young Aisha radiallahu anha. It will not be a general sweeping statement or reference to all Christians or against all Christians. So why should it matter who says the marriage was wrong? Why not simply address the arguments? Because if someone says something is wrong, we need to know how they came to this conclusion, what was their measuring stick or reference point. A Christian polemicist writing under the alias of Silas states, "I thank God that our standards are better than his and those of Islam when it comes to protecting children." He says, if Muhammad were a true prophet, why are the world's standards better than his? So let's ask, what are the Judeo-Christian standards of this Christian polemicist, or the world standards against which the marriage of young Aisha allegedly fails? Let's see what these standards are. We will address these tonight. There are 3 core arguments that I'll be covering tonight, although briefly, and you can read about these in greater detail when I aim to publish articles related to this very topic. You can access these articles via the Muslim Debate Initiative website, and these articles will become available by the end of the year, inshallah. So now the 3 core arguments. Number 1, that Aisha was too young for marriage at age 6 and too young for consummation of that marriage at age 9. Why? Because at age 9, she was allegedly still prepubescent. She was still a prepubescent child. That is what the claim is. Number 2, that the marriage was and is in line with certain Quranic verses that implicitly give permission to sexually engage with prepubescent girls. Number 3, that the age gap between young Aisha radiallahu anha and the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was morally and socially unacceptable and comparable to an act of child abuse and pedophilia. So let's start by addressing the first thing, which was it wrong? Was the marriage of Aisha wrong? Was the marriage of young Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, at age 6 in the Arabian Peninsula 1400 years ago, was it wrong at that time, at that place? History tells us no. In its historical context, it was not wrong. How do we know this? Rabbi Isaac Klein, in his book, A Guide to Jewish Religious Practice, tells us child marriages were very common in ancient times. According to the online multidisciplinary journal of Women in Judaism, Jewish girls got married at age 9 right up until World War I. According to Hindu customs, which predate both Hindu and both Judeo-Christian and Islamic tradition, the father of a girl was obliged by Hindu law and custom to marry a girl before she attained puberty. And one of the most influential texts in 17th century, one of the most influential legal texts in 17th century England outlined that the marriage of girls under the age of 12 was permitted. Child marriages were a known practice and documented among the monarchy and the nobility across Europe. And this was known right up until, recent history, right up until the mid to late 19th century. Now, Lady Margaret, just to give you some examples, Lady Margaret Beaufort, grandmother of King Henry VIII, reportedly first married when she was 1 or 3 years old. This marriage was dissolved 3 years later, only for her to remarry at the age of 12, and she was left pregnant by the age of 13. In 1478 in England, Mary de Mowbray, Countess of Norfolk, married at age 5. Agnes, Countess of Oxford, she married at age 3. Was the marriage at age 6 of Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, a first in history, one of its kind? No. History tells us no. So we cannot really take what we recognize as the standards of today, what we identify with as acceptable today. We cannot superimpose those standards that we have today on the pre-modern era. We can't do that. It's not a valid measuring stick. It's not valid. It's not a valid way of criticizing this marriage by extracting it from history. Now, second concern, did Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, consummate marriage or sexually engage at the age of 6? Or was she even expected to do so? No, she wasn't expected to do so. Aisha was married at age 6. She remained living with her parents for 3 years until the age of 9, at which point, yes, the marriage was then consummated with the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, when it was socially and morally considered acceptable by all concerned. That included her parents, that included the community around her, that included Prophet Muhammad's worst enemies who were ready to assassinate him, but did not see any reason to attack him on this particular marriage or union. And there was every opportunity for young Aisha to seek refuge with those enemies who would have given her immediate refuge against this marriage, but she didn't choose to do so, and it was never the case that she ever complained of it, even in her older widowed years. Now, in the modern era we live in, it may be difficult to grasp the idea or reasoning behind a 3-year delay of her getting married at 6 and consummating the marriage at age 9. It may be, we may find that difficult to really understand. Why was that 3-year gap there? Well, precisely for the reason that it had to be, we had to wait. They had to wait to see until she was ready. Today, there's a tendency to delay marriage, but not to delay sex. There's a tendency to rush into sex, but then to delay marriage. Earlier on, the emphasis was on securing a good marriage with a good suitor, and then, delay sex, wait for her, wait until she's ready for it. In Islam, the only way sex is permitted, sexual engagement is permitted, is through marriage. And even if a girl could marry at an early age, the marriage could not be consummated until it was seen that she was ready and able for it. And this point was understood, recognized, identified as socially and morally acceptable by all concerned. Now, in his book, A Guide to Jewish Religious Practice, in reference to child marriages, Rabbi Isaac Klein again says, since marriages were arranged by parents, the consent of parties was not necessary, and age was not a factor. The physical factor related only to the consummation of the marriage. Hence, there was usually a waiting period between the marriage contract, the agreement, and the consummation of the marriage. Giza Vermes, in his book Jesus the Jew, tells us that marriages of prepubescent girls were known, and there was a waiting period between the contract and the consummation of the marriage, and this was during the time of Jesus. On a side note, according to the Catholic tradition, Mary, the mother of Jesus, was apparently married when she was between the ages of 12 or 14. She married Joseph, who was apparently in his 90s. Now, even if it's argued by other Christians that, no, we can dismiss this because these were apocryphal writings, we don't accept this. Well, Catholic tradition does accept this to a certain extent. And the point remains that the authors of this documentation that she was married at this age to a man of this age, the point remains that they were aware of these practices. They weren't ashamed to write this down and document it, even if it was false. Why would they make up a lie against Mary, the mother of Jesus? Why would it be like this if it was, disturbing or, invited condemnation? So now, when was a girl considered ready or able to consummate her marriage? When was Aisha, radiallahu anha, when was she considered ready? Why was she considered ready at age 9 as opposed to age 6? In accordance with what is socially and morally acceptable, whether it was 1400 years ago or in recent history up until the 19th century, mid to late 19th century, marriage and or consummation of marriage coincided with puberty. What do we understand by puberty? Is there a single standard definition of puberty that has remained throughout the course of history? No. Taken from the Latin terms puber and pubertas, puberty simply translates as adult or maturity. Yet there are 3 signs for girls, for example, that are associated with puberty in girls. And these include menstruation, growth of pubic hair, and breast development. But, however, contrary to common belief that all 3 signs are necessary for completion of puberty in young girls, it's not the case. Puberty has never depended on all 3 signs manifesting. According to a recent study in 2008, it was published in 2008, again you can get the references from my articles, a girl can complete puberty, or puberty can be complete in girls simply on the basis of breast development and growth of pubic hair. And in the same study, it was shown that it can be complete by the time a girl is aged 8. And this isn't precocious or premature puberty at age 8. This study shows that it's quite normal for puberty to be complete in a girl at age 8. So science is telling us this now, okay? Bear in mind. Now, Christian apologist David Wood writes, Muslim apologists often claim that marriage to young girls was common in biblical times. This may be correct, but it is because these marriages were part of the culture, not because God endorsed them. Now, this is what our Christian apologist friend David Wood has said. I disagree. Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, contrary to what even some Muslims will say, did not just sway or swing with whatever was socially acceptable or were the social norms of the day. No, he actually stood against certain social practices of his day among the pagan Arabs, such as the burial of infant children, of infant girls. And the biggest one he stood against was the pagan worship of idol gods. And for this, he had to face persecution. He faced almost being assassinated. His companions, some of whom were assassinated, killed, murdered, persecuted, they were tortured. But he stood to his word and he stood against those practices. So was it because he was going along with the flow? No, it wasn't. And okay, another point is that note that our Christian apologist friend David Wood mentions, yes, it's correct that this was known during biblical times. And I've just noted earlier on that this happened during the times of Jesus, peace be upon him. So now the same question arises, did Jesus not contest these marriages? Did he turn a blind eye to what Christians are calling child abuse now? Do the Christians today hold a higher moral ground than Jesus did by not taking a stand against these marriages in his day? I mean, we often say when your neighbour's being beaten up next door, if you stay quiet, you're a silent party to the crime. So was Jesus a silent party to the crime of what is regarded as child abuse today or pedophilia? I don't think so. And I think our Christian friends would also not think so. So what did God endorse according to Judeo-Christian scripture? David Wood's colleague Sam Shamoon helps shed some light on this in his article, The Holy Bible on the Age of Marriage. And he turns to the parable in Ezekiel 16, verses 4 to 14. And he refers to this parable as a credible biblical reference point for puberty and adds, at this point, a girl is ready to sexually engage. He writes, God mentions that the young babe attained the age for lovemaking after her breasts had formed and her pubic hairs had grown. He says, clear signs of puberty. Now, why is this important? Remember I said, what is their measuring stick? It's important because when the marriage of young Aisha is attacked, it's alleged that she was prepubescent on the basis that she had not yet menstruated. So what they're saying is, here, according to their own scripture, the same apologists who say that Aisha was still and should still be considered a prepubescent child at age 9 when she consummated her marriage, she should be considered that because she hadn't yet menstruated. This is scattered throughout the articles and blog sites that, you know, these apologists and the polemicists have spread over the internet. In short, a girl is considered fully developed on the appearance of breasts and growth of pubic hair. This is what Christian scripture is saying, and as I mentioned earlier, this is what science is attesting to, so our Christian friends would be happy with this. But they wouldn't be happy because it just doesn't fit the criteria they're using against Aisha being prepubescent, saying that she hadn't menstruated. So what if she hadn't menstruated? That is not something which is mandatory for puberty to be complete in girls. In fact, according to Sam Shamoun, it's not even mandatory for her to have menstruated before she engages in sexual, you know, in sexual engagement. Now, so do you see the problem here? The problem here is with the measuring stick. Puberty can be complete in girls even if menstruation is delayed, as it does happen in conditions known as primary amenorrhea. There's also the condition of secondary amenorrhea. This is a pause or delay in menstruation in girls who are going through puberty, or women who are either breastfeeding or they're in pregnancy, or whatever the physiological condition may be. So in the Islamic tradition, in Islam, a girl can reach complete puberty and have not yet menstruated. And this is an important factor when deciding whether or not a girl is able to consummate marriage. But it is not the only factor. Unlike pointed out in the parable in Ezekiel 16, which states, okay, it's okay, as long as she's grown breasts and pubic hair, she can go into sexual engagement with a man. But this is not necessarily the case in Islam. Yes, she could have pubic hair, she could have breasts, but she could be 12 months old. She could be an infant still. In cases of precocious puberty, a young girl was known to have menstruated, grown breasts, grown pubic hair by age 12 months. Would anyone in any era consider such an infant ready to engage in sexual activity or consummate a marriage? No. I mean, that's a given. This is why it's not written in stone in Islam or in science that, okay, XXX signs of puberty qualify a girl for sex. And neither do the legal ages of consent around the world. It doesn't specify that a girl has to attain all 3 signs of puberty. So please remember this when you read the criticisms. Now this is where the attack comes into play against the Quran. The alleged, the claim that chapter 65 verse 4 of the Quran, in conjunction with other verses, it stated that, you know, I'll actually quote David Wood on this. He writes, if Islam allows a man to divorce a girl who isn't old enough to have her period, it follows that Islam allows a man to marry a girl who hasn't reached menses. Now notice David Wood is quite smart, I would say, in not saying a girl who hasn't reached puberty. Why? Because it is what it is. In the Quran, in that verse, it simply refers to menstruation. It simply refers to the term menstruation. It doesn't say that a girl who has not reached puberty is eligible. It doesn't even implicitly say that. She is eligible to engage sexually with a man or consummate her marriage. Yes, if you were looking at this verse at face value, yes. And according to the commentaries that go with this verse, a girl can marry, as did Aisha at age 6, having not menstruated or having not gone through puberty. And she can sexually engage having not menstruated. But can she sexually engage having not completed puberty? No. There's a difference between the terms puberty and menstruation. The two are not synonymous in this respect. There is nothing in the Quran or Islam to prohibit marriage to those who have not yet menstruated, yet it would be disingenuous, inaccurate, and dishonest to say that the Quran or other Islamic sources endorse consummation of marriage or sex with prepubescent girls. Remember, not premenstrual girls, prepubescent girls. And we know puberty does not require menstruation to be complete. Now, Islamic scholar Hassan al-Basri has stated that a man is not allowed to be intimate with his wife even without the act of penetration unless she has attained puberty. So remember how we understand puberty. It can be all 3 signs, it can be 2 signs, it doesn't have to be menstruation as included in those signs. What about age in connection with puberty or sexual maturity according to Judeo-Christian scripture or the Bible? One commentary on biblical law and ethics states, although the Old Testament nowhere explicitly states the typical ages for marriage, the mention of the age for sexual love in Ezekiel 16 verse 8 may suggest that women generally married soon after puberty. May suggest. So in other words, like the Islamic position, as with the Islamic position, it's understood in the Judeo-Christian tradition, in accordance with Judeo-Christian scripture, yes, a girl could marry under the age of puberty, under the age of menstruation. But according to this parable in Ezekiel, as earlier pointed out, she's ready for the age of sexual love once she's grown breasts and grown pubic hair. In June 2000, it was reported in the Observer that 1 in 6 girls attain the age of puberty by age 8. And even if this is the minimum age, studies have shown that a girl can reach complete puberty as early as a year later, even by age 9. If a girl can marry and be ready for lovemaking after puberty according to the biblical verses as quoted by our Christian apologist friend Sam Shamoun, then evidently he agrees that a girl would be ready by age 8 and even by age 9. And inadvertently, he agrees that at age 9 Aisha would have reached an age of complete pubertal maturity and would have been ready for lovemaking, as he put it. Now, in absence of a specific biblical age guideline, Christian apologist Sam Shamoun turns to Jewish tradition and references the Mishnah as a credible source. From which to extract a minimum age, a minimum numerical age guideline of 12 years and 6 months to define a girl's sexual maturity. Now, while it is preferable to wait until a girl is 12 years old, according to Judeo-Christian tradition, before she is while it is preferable to wait until she's reaches the age of 12 before she's considered capable of sexual engagement according to Jewish tradition. Again, this isn't written in stone. The Talmud states a maiden aged 3 years and a day may be acquired in marriage by intercourse, and if her deceased husband's brother cohabits with her, she becomes his. Again, I have the references for these quotes. A commentary on Mishnaic law states, and I'm giving you this commentary because this quote I've given you from the Talmud has been dismissed as a lie by Muslims. And so let me give you some, a bit more to go on. A commentary on Mishnaic law states, in the matter of the legal status of children, female and male, the girl 3 years and 1 day old is deemed capable of sexual relations. Now, this isn't according to Islamic tradition, so please don't get the two confused. This is according to Judeo-Christian tradition. If the girl is less than 3 years and 1 day old, we do not regard the sexual relationship as of legal consequence. In other words, there's still nothing wrong with it. Now, described as a standard against which other later codifications were often measured, the Mishnah Torah is still considered to be one of the main authoritative codifications of Jewish law and ethics. According to historian John Coyle O'Day, he says, an honest examination of the historical record indicates that biblical law and the Judeo-Christian tradition often condoned sexual relations between adults and children. The contemporary social and legal taboo against sex with children developed only gradually over the centuries and did not become firmly established until the late 19th century. Now compare this to the Islamic position that you cannot sexually engage with a girl unless she attains the age of puberty and understanding and maturity. This is the contrast. Please make a note of that. What does Islam say about age, puberty, and sexual maturity? According to mainstream Islamic scholarship, the marriage may be consummated when the girl is able for sexual engagement, which varies from one girl to another. So no age limit can be set. This is the correct view. There is nothing in the hadith of Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, to set an age limit. I mean, some Muslims claim, she married at age 9 because it sets the age limit. No, there is nothing in the hadith of Aisha to set an age limit or to forbid that in the case of a girl who is able for it before the age of 9, or allow for it in the case of a girl who is not able for it at the age of 9. So the age 9 doesn't mean, okay, she's immediately ready because Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, was ready at age 9. No, Islamic tradition mentions that it varies from one girl to another. So you can't put an age limit on it. Another common argument put forward is that we have evolved and understood that early marriage and pregnancy can be harmful to a girl. Well, from an Islamic point of view, there is a protocol in place that takes this into consideration. This is why there was a 3-year delay between Aisha being 6 at marriage and consummating the marriage at age 9. There is a protocol in place. The Islamic tradition understands that there should be no harm brought to a young girl. So Islam doesn't contest this. Do today's age of consent laws point to one universal age at which point a girl should be considered fully developed or sexually mature? There is no magic number that marks the point when physical, psychosocial, and sexual maturity converge for all girls universally throughout the course of time There is no magic one number that demarcates that. The age of consent varies from one country to the next, even today, ranging from ages 12 or 13 in Chile and Spain, respectively, up to even 18 in Turkey, or even 21 in some countries. And you can check these numbers, they're subject to change. You can Google ages of consent. In other words, even today, the legal ages of consent around the world, which vary, agree with the Islamic position that a girl, there is no age limit. There can be no one single age limit set, because development in a girl varies from one girl to the next. This is understood even today. The Royal College of Psychiatrists, based in the United Kingdom, have supported age 16 as a legal age of consent, but bear in mind, this was done without assuming a connection between biological development, psychological competence, and the law. Christian polemicist under the alias Silas makes a claim that at age 9 the brain has not reached a level of cognitive maturity, stating, the brain's ability to be maturely cognitive occurs well after age 9. At age 9, Aisha was barely able to comprehend the world around her. This is the claim made by this Christian polemicist. Remember, I used to be, working as a neuroscientist. That was my profession. I have a PhD in psychological medicine. I have a master's in advanced neuroscience. This is where my credentials mean something. And when I tell you, really, is this possible? Is this Christian polemicist correct in saying by age 9 the brain's ability to be maturely cognitive is just not there? No. Let's see. Don't just take my word for it. Let's take some examples here. Kim Young from Korea, described as a linguist genius, was fluent in Korean, Japanese, Chinese, English, German, Spanish, Vietnamese at age 4. At age 4, not 6 or 9. And he was solving calculus problems by age 5. Give me a calculus problem at my age, good luck. He secured a PhD in physics before his 15th birthday. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart composed his first piece of published music at age 5, and by his teens had already composed sonatas, symphonies, and concertos. And just try and remember that every time you hear one of his music compositions. Remember how old he was. Now, young Aisha, when she married at age 6, she, of course, she didn't go and live or cohabit with the Prophet, but by age 9, imagine, she was known for her intelligence, for her maturity, and the very fact that she narrated over 2,000 hadiths, second to any male companion of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. The fact that she did that was because she was young. Her brain was able to register this during the lifetime that she spent, during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, that she spent 9 years of marriage with. She was registering all of this, and she conveyed this. And this is what many Muslims around the world to this day are still relying on for daily, anything from daily practices, to how they, have a relationship with their wife or their husband. This is thanks to her intelligence. According to an article published in American Psychologist, drawing age boundaries on the basis of development cannot be done sensibly without a careful and nuanced consideration of the particular demands placed on the individual for adult-like maturity and in different domains of functioning. Meaning, look, if you're going to expose your 4-year-old or 3-year-old to books or tools of learning, as was done in the case of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart or King Young, then it's not impossible for that child to quickly develop a level of maturity by the age of 9, 10, by the age of puberty, that he or she can be regarded as an adult. Anthropologist Mary Lewis writes, no matter what period we are examining, childhood is more than a biological age. We simply cannot, she says, transpose our view of childhood directly on to the past. What are we exposing our children to? You know, our children, we're raising our children to remain children for the longest period of time. So of course, a 9-year-old to us today will remain a 9-year-old child, even if he or she goes through the motions of puberty. Even if he or she goes through the motions of puberty at the legal age of consent in many countries, which is 16 or 18. Many parents will say, no, you're not ready for marriage. No, no, no. But what will they do? Just hand them a condom, a contraceptive or something. Go ahead with the sex, but don't worry about the marriage until later, until you're mature up there. That's the solution. Islamic solution is no. Marriage and then sex, not sex and then marriage. Is abstinence the answer? Go and look at the research done by Christian organizations, and they will tell you abstinence is not working. I'll come back to this a bit later. What about consent? Aisha's father consented to his daughter's marriage when he saw benefit in it for her. Now, obviously, this sounds shocking to us because we may be inclined to believe that parents, or more specifically fathers, lacked love or compassion for their daughters. According to historian Stephanie Kuntz, she writes, when parents arranged a marriage for their children, it was done with it in mind that they were investing in their child's future, just as a modern parent sets up a college savings fund. And marriage was the most important career decision they would ever make. And most generally, the children would follow their parents and also took their neighbors' and friends' opinions into account. Historically, child marriages were acceptable under the presumed guardianship and care of parents and society as a whole and law. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, said, those that God has entrusted with the care or guardianship of others who fail in taking care of them properly, they will not smell the fragrance of paradise. In the state of Virginia in 1689, Mary Hathaway, a young girl, was married at age 9. This is next door in the US, which at the time was under the legal age of consent of 12. Yet the marriage was still accepted and it was valid. It was still considered unbreakable under the canon laws of England, unless it was renounced or challenged before the point of sexual contact. Now, 2 years later, well-versed in law with the aid of lawyers, Hathaway challenged the marriage and had it annulled. This was legal victory just over 300 years ago. Just over 300 years ago. In America, next door. Could a young girl voice opposition or challenge an arranged marriage over 1400 years ago in the Arabian Peninsula, or even today under Islam? Don't get this confused. Don't say, oh yeah, but you know, they don't challenge it. You know, there are forced marriages. Yes, there are. I'll come to that. An Islamic arranged marriage is often confused with a forced marriage. The practice of forced marriages is not something which is endorsed, condoned, or permitted in Islam. But it happens. It happens in the Muslim community. But is it limited to the Muslim community? No. This is a common misconception, and it's a common piece of misinformation that is spread across the board, across, you know, blogs and websites and YouTube videos, you know, that is Muslims, you know, engage in forced marriages of prepubescent girls on top of that. But let's see where the truth lies. Let's go to the source. A young girl once approached the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and complained that she had been forced into a marriage, pressured into it by her father. In response, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, advised her of her right to annul the marriage. This wasn't 300 years ago, as in the case of Mary Hathaway. This was 1400 years ago, well before then. In short, a parent or guardian's authority, decision, and consent was not and is not beyond question. It can be challenged and it can be overturned. Aisha narrated, the Prophet said, it is essential to have the consent of a virgin. Aisha said, what if the virgin feels shy? The Prophet said, her silence then means her consent. Now, it's important to note that the Prophet Muhammad clearly states the importance of obtaining consent. A girl should make it known when consent is not being given. It doesn't mean that if she's silent, that's it, that's her consent. Yes, if she remains silent, that is her consent. But the emphasis is she should voice her opposition. She should, make it known. A woman's silence can be damaging. Even in a court of law today in the secular world, in cases of rape, that we always hear cases where they say, well, she didn't say anything. I went ahead. The man says she didn't say anything. She didn't object. So this is where it's being made clear. Silence is taken as consent. Make it clear, make it known. This is what Islam is saying. The fact that Aisha is witnessing and narrating this hadith is also very important, because this confirms that Aisha herself was made aware of her own right after her marriage, after the fact that she is now married with the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, of her right to also annul her marriage, just like this girl. Some may argue, well, maybe she'd be too scared, too frightened to do so, or to challenge the authority of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Why wouldn't she be able to challenge it? There were many enemies of the Prophet who would gladly give her refuge and fight the Prophet for her right and challenge him against his own word of annulling this other young girl's marriage. So, it could be challenged. The Prophet's words could have been challenged, but she didn't. She lived a happy marriage. She never complained about her marriage. She was happy with the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Now, can things go wrong? Yes, of course they can. As with any age of consent law, even today, yes. Men can engage sexually with young girls, even under the legal age of consent today. Things can go wrong. Laws were made to be broken, as they say. Associate Professor of Islamic Studies, Professor Jonathan Brown, writes in his book, misquoting Muhammad, historical evidence from 19th century Ottoman Palestine suggests that husbands having sexual intercourse with wives before they reached puberty did sometimes occur, but it was rare. It was condemned socially and censored by Sharia court judges. Sharia courts in French Algeria in the 1850s considered it equally despicable. How did 19th century Sharia courts condemning sexual engagement with girls who had not reached an age of puberty compare to 19th century England? Child abuse is not a new problem in human history. So to equate it with child marriage is not quite the same thing, because in these pre-modern times, when child marriages were known, there was also child abuse. There was a differentiation between the two, a separation between the two. What was recognized as child abuse and what was recognized as child marriage. It was the lobbying efforts of a feminist by the name of Josephine Butler that led to the age of consent being set at 16, across England just over a century ago in 1885 in response to reports of children as young as 3 and 5 years old being found in brothels across England. So children as young as 3 and 5 years old were being found in brothels across England, across 19th century England. So the publicity campaign created by Josephine Butler spread to the United States, which soon saw the rise of its own Christian feminist movement to change the age of consent. Now, a series of recent news reports relating to child brides in predominantly Muslim regions, including Yemen, Afghanistan, and Nigeria, have ignited criticism and questions concerning the Islamic stance on child marriages. Another misconception. Are these child brides or child marriages limited to these Muslim communities? No. Has it been magnified because of Islam being in the news lately? Yes. According to the Demographic and Health Surveys and a 2007 study by the International Center for Research on Women, child marriages were not connected to any one specific religion, whereas they were connected to poverty. An authoritative figure on Islamic jurisprudence, Imam al-Nawawi, has said that according to al-Shafi and his companions, it's preferable not to marry off a girl until she reaches the age of puberty and she gives her consent. Otherwise, she may end up in a marriage that she dislikes. Notably, in the Quran, sound judgment and marriageable age are shown to go hand in hand when releasing property to an orphan. It's understood that the same principle applies before consummation of marriage with a young girl, that she should be considered ready for it. So does Islam condone forced, what may be viewed, they may be forced marriages, what are going on in Yemen, Afghanistan, Nigeria, they may be forced. Why equate them necessarily with child marriages that were arranged or agreed to or socially or morally acceptable? And still maybe, if times were to change, if the level of maturity of a child to an adult was to change. Now, what about the age gap? Should this be condemned in its historical context? No. According to Jewish commentaries, I'll give you examples. According to Jewish commentaries, Rebecca, biblical mother of Esau and Jacob, married 40-year-old Isaac when she was aged 3. Christian theologian and philosopher St. Augustine ended an out-of-wedlock relationship of 15 years to enter into an arranged marriage with a 10-year-old girl. King Henry I married his 11-year-old daughter to 27-year-old German Emperor Heinrich V. Charles the Bald, King of France, presented his 12-year-old daughter Judith for marriage to 61-year-old Athelwulf of Wessex in England. Here in Canada, in 1610, Samuel de Champlain, dubbed the founding father of the New France, or more specifically Quebec City, he at age 43 married 12-year-old Helene Bull. One of the most notable marriages in history was that of 29-year-old King Richard II with the 7-year-old daughter Isabel of King Charles of France. A marriage contracted in the hope of bringing an end to a 100-year war between England and France. Now, it's fair to point out that although some of these marriages were not consummated or even immediately consummated, the point remains that they were contracted, they were celebrated, They were recognized, they were not condemned. There was no objection, there was no reaction of shock from families, communities, or societies as a whole. And it goes without saying that they were not taking their cues from Islam or the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So now we come to the accusation of pedophilia based on the age gap between young Aisha and the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Physician and sexologist Kurt Freund, known for his research work in pedophilia, has emphasized that a pedophile is attracted towards children on the basis that there is no development of secondary sex characteristics such as breast development, no visible growth of the child, in other words. From her own experience, self-evaluation, and in her own words, young Aisha declared that a girl becomes a woman at age 9. According to Al-Dawoodi, young Aisha was physically mature when she consummated her marriage at age 9. In an effort to add credibility to the accusation of pedophilia and child abuse against the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, in light of his marriage with young Aisha over 1400 years ago, the Wiki Islam website references a set of criteria that is used by psychiatrists, people in the clinical health profession, to diagnose psychiatric disorders and symptoms such as pedophilia, right? So this set of criteria has a name, and the name of this criteria is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the DSM criteria or manual. And I've used this. It's about this thick, the manual. But what this website does is it takes a small set of criteria from this manual to diagnose pedophilia and associate it with the Prophet's marriage to Aisha radiallahu anha. Now, as a neuroscientist, like I said, I've worked with this manual, so I know what the layperson will not know and what this website does not disclose. And what this manual states clearly is that a clinician who is not a clinician, not a layperson, a clinician who is not familiar with the nuances of an individual's cultural frame of reference may incorrectly judge as a psychopathology those normal variations in behavior, belief, or experience that are particular to an individual. It's important, it states, that the DSM, this criteria, not be applied mechanically by untrained individuals. The specific diagnostic criteria included in DSM are meant to serve as guidelines to be informed by clinical judgment and are not meant to be used in a cookbook fashion, let alone be applied to a marriage 1400 years ago, or to the marriage of of 7-year-old Isabel to King Richard II. To use medical and scientific texts, honestly, to give credibility to false accusations of pedophilia against the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is inaccurate, it's disingenuous, and it's deceptive. Unfortunately, these websites, for them, if deceptive works, they'll go with it. Now, Muslims try to explain why the marriage took place. Some say it was to solidify a bond between the Prophet Muhammad and Aisha's father, Abu Bakr, as companions. Some say it was just going along with the social norms. Some say it was to demarcate age 9 or puberty as the right time. It doesn't say or confirm any of this. You could deduce from that, yes, you could say maybe some of these things came about as a result of the marriage. But no, I mean, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, didn't just go along with the social norms. Age 9 doesn't demarcate the right time. Puberty doesn't necessarily demarcate the right time. And the bond between Abu Bakr and the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was already solid. You know, this is one of the reasons Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, he hesitated in accepting the marriage proposal via this woman, Khawla bint Hakim, with the Prophet Muhammad. He said, because we're brothers. But the Prophet Muhammad clarified. He said, no, we're not brothers in blood. You know, we're just brothers as in, you know, hey bro, you know, we're friends. You know, we're close, we're that close, we're like brothers. So the bond was already there. So, I mean, whatever. So now, child marriages were arranged, they were agreed to, they were facilitated, they were celebrated under the presumed protection and guardianship of parents like us, you and me today, jurists like today, communities like today, societies as a whole. So what changed? Are we better parents? Are we morally on a higher ground than the parents of yesterday or the societies of yesterday? Are our children better off today? We are now raising our children to remain children for a longer period of time. So a child can hit puberty, but sexual maturity or psychosocial maturity will not have quite got there in line with puberty. So, for example, a 12-year-old in Britain, or a 15-year-old, or a 16-year-old, or an 18-year-old be racing towards experiencing sex, they may not be ready up there. This is what's changed. This is why we cannot understand what was apparent in the past to those communities that no, their children were considered mature enough. They were considered mature enough physically and mentally. It aligned. In the special 1990 spring edition of Newsweek magazine, it stated that young Americans entering the 21st century are far less mature than their ancestors were at the beginning of the 20th century. The difference, it states, is evident in all areas of youthful development, whether it's sex, love, marriage, education, work. Physically, today's youths are maturing earlier than previous generations. But emotionally, they are taking much longer to develop adult attachments. According to work carried out at the Southampton University in England, for the first time, it states, in our 200,000 year history, as a species, humans have become sexually mature before becoming psychologically equipped to function as adults in society. Professor Hansen says we cannot change biological reality, but we have to work out a new set of structures to deal with this new reality. In other words, we have to try and come to some kind of a way of aligning when a child is physically and sexually ready with psychological maturity or psychosocial or sexual maturity up there, which is what was happening in the pre-modern era. They were psychologically and, mentally mature by the time they reached the age of puberty. Now, so just to close now, what we identify as abusive when it comes to child marriages is based on what we filter through the lens of what we are exposed to today and what we consider acceptable today. We today are not exposed to child marriages. What we're exposed to is simply child abuse. We're exposed to news reports of child sex trafficking, child porn, sexual abuse of children, across religious institutions or government facilities. We hear of pedophiles preying on children via social networks and so on. This is what we see. We don't know how the child marriages did work and were different to what was recognized and was prevalent as child abuse even back in the day. This is what concerns us. And so understandably, this is why criticism and condemnation of the marriage of young Aisha so often goes unchallenged. And this works in the favor of those seeking to demonize and discredit the Prophet Muhammad and thereby discredit Islam as a religion of God. Researching the satanic ritual abuse phenomenon for the British Department of Health in 1994, anthropologist Jean Lafontaine stated, "Pedophilia is the most potent representation of evil in modern society." How is this relevant? Let's see. In her book, Childism, Confronting Prejudice Against Children, psychoanalyst and award-winning author Elizabeth Young Bruhl describes the transition in America's perception of the enemy under the President Reagan. She notes that by opening the doors, and these are her words, by opening the doors of the civil services to evangelical Christians as a counterbalance to the perceived threat of the enemy, which were the communists, Reagan's embrace of these voters and their agenda was leading the nation to imagine and define a new enemy. A nation once suspicious or fearful of the Bolsheviks and communists was now turning its attention to a newfound enemy. The paedophile next door has since been succeeded to a large extent by the Muslim terrorist next door. But this is important to note, she writes, that the Muslim terrorist is held to be obsessed with child or adolescent virgins waiting for him as a reward for his martyrdom in the next life. That is, he is thoroughly a political paedophile. So there you have it. Wherever or whenever there has been a prophet or a man of influence, there has also been and always will be those who go that extra mile to find fault in his character in an effort to discredit whatever it is he stands for when it goes against their own beliefs or agendas. Scandal is something we all sit up and listen to and we pay attention to it. And it's often been an effective way of dismantling men of influence. But instead of being dismantled, 1400 years later, history bears witness, present day bears witness, that the Prophet Muhammad and what he stood for has not been dismantled. He is still ranked number 1 in Michael Hart's book, The 100, a ranking of the most influential persons in history. I invite you to step beyond the smoke of misinformation and misconception and research for yourselves. Pick up a book, go to the sources, read for yourselves, understand beyond this smoke what Islam is about. Don't let Muslims define religion for you. Let religion define itself. Read up what Islam stands for and what the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, conveyed to humanity. Thank you for your time and thank you for your attention. Sorry for going over the time. Thank you.